In this video, we're going to talk about how to solve quadratic equations using the zero product property. We've already discussed factoring and that sort of thing. The whole reason why we factor is so that we can use this zero product property. What it says is that two factors multiplied together equaling zero, then one of them has to equal zero. Because think about it, 3 times 0 is going to be 0, or 0 times 4 is also going to be 0. So each of my factors, what I'm going to do is, in order to solve these, I'm first going to make sure that my equation is in the correct format. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, so I've moved everything to one side. Then I'm going to factor it so that I can set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So a lot of these quadratic equations are going to give me two possible answers for x, which makes sense because I have an x squared in there. So there are two possible numbers that will satisfy this equation. So let's look at an example. So let's look at 2x squared minus 10x is equal to 0. The first question to always ask yourself is everything on one side of the equal sign, leaving us just with a 0 on the other side? Yes, it is. So the second question is, can I factor anything out of all the terms? So looking at 2x squared minus 10x, I can factor out a 2 and an x, leaving me with an x minus 5. That equals 0. Now notice I've got one x out here, one x in here. There's nothing else I have to factor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this factor, 2x, equal to 0. And then I'm going to set this other factor, x minus 5, also equal to 0. And I'm going to solve each one of them individually. So looking at this one, this is 2 times x, opposite of multiplication is division. So this gives me that x is equal to 0. So if I plug in 0 for these x's and solve this left-hand side of the equation, I should get a 0 back. So then on this other one, x minus 5 is equal to 0. I'm going to add 5 to both sides, giving me that x is equal to a positive 5. Again, what this represents is that if I plug a 5 in for these x's, I should get a 0 back. So let's check this. Okay? So let's check first starting with x equals 0. So I have 2 times 0 squared minus 10 times 0. And my question is, does that equal 0? Well, 0 squared is just 0. So 2 times 0 is 0. 10 times 0 is 0. 0 minus 0 is 0. So yes, x equaling 0 does work. Let's now check with x equaling 5. Okay, so I'm going to have a 5 here and a 5 here, because whenever I plug in my 2x squared minus 10x, question is does that equal 0? You have to be careful with order of operations here. 5 squared gives me 25 times 2. 10 times 5 gives me a negative 50. 2 times 25 gives me 50. So 50 minus 50 is 0. So x does equal 5. So this is how you can always check your answers, is plugging those numbers that you solve for back into the original equation and seeing if they equal. Let's look at another example. I have x squared minus 4x minus 32 is equal to 0. Everything's on one side of the equal sign, so that's good. I'm going to look. There's nothing I can factor out of all three of those. So I have a trinomial, which means I need to use that AC method. Okay? So my A in this case is an understood 1. My C is a negative 32. My B is a negative 4. So I want something that multiplies to give me negative 32 and adds to give me negative 4. Well, if I look, I can use negative 4 and an 8. Notice I'm having to use at least one negative because of this sign. So negative 4 plus 8 actually gives me a positive 4. I want a negative 4. So let's try 4 times a negative 8. 4 minus 8 gives me a negative 4. That's the pair that I want to use. Okay? I'm going to separate this negative 4 into a positive 4x and a negative 8x. And you're going to notice I'm going to keep everything else, including the equals 0. I'm going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to look at these first two terms, x squared plus 4x. I can factor out an x, leaving me with an x plus 4. I'm going to look at the second set of terms. Notice I have a minus, so I've got to take out that negative. Between 8x and 32, I can take out an 8, leaving me with an x plus 4, because remember I took out that negative. That's all still equal to 0. My parentheses are the same, which is good. So x plus 4, and then my leftovers, my x minus my 8, goes in the second set. Now I have two things multiplied together to give me 0. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put x plus 4 equals 0 and x minus 8 equals 0. And I'm going to solve each one of them. So I'll subtract a 4 from both sides. And on this first one, I get x is equal to a negative 4. On the second one, I'm going to add 8 to both sides. And I will get that x is equal to 8. Both of these, if you plug it back in, give us the result that we're wanting. So if I plug in negative 4 in for the x's and solve, I do get 0. You just have to be a little bit careful. Let me go ahead and set that one up for you. Remember, especially when you're doing a negative, make sure you put that in parentheses so that this becomes a positive. Minus 4 times a negative 4 minus 32. And now if you plug that in, it will equal 0. Let's look at our last example. I've got 10x squared plus x minus 2 equals 0. So I don't have a common factor. Everything is already on one side. I do have 3 terms, so I'm going to have to do the AC method again. So AC, my A is 10, my C is a negative 2, my B is a positive 1. So I want two numbers that multiply to give me a negative 20, add to give me a positive 1. Negative 4 times 5, 4 times a negative 5, both of those give me negative 20. So negative 4 times, or plus 5 is equal to 1. 4 plus a negative 5 is equal to a negative 1. So I want that first set of numbers. So I get negative 4x plus 5x. And I'm going to keep everything else the same. Okay? I'm going to have a minus 2 equals 0 and a 10x squared in the front. Now I'm going to look at the first two terms. 10x squared minus 4x. And I can take out a 2x, leaving me with a 5x minus 2. The second set of terms, remember I take this plus. There's nothing common, so remember what I told you in the factoring video, we always take a 1, leaving me with a 5x minus 2, and that's going to equal 0. Thankfully, my parentheses are the same, so I get 5x minus 2 times a 2x plus 1 equals 0. We have it factored. We don't have our final answers, but we do have it factored. So now then, remember to set each set of parentheses, 5x minus 2 equal to 0, and a 2x plus 1 equal to 0, and solve. So I'm going to add a 2 to both sides, giving me a 5x is equal to 2. I'm going to then divide both sides by a 5. And I am going to leave this as fractions like I told you before. Most of the time we're going to leave these as fractions because we don't want those repeating decimals, that type thing. So I get x is equal to 2/5. This is one of my answers. I have to finish out this other part. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. And I get 2x is equal to a -1. And I'm going to divide by a 2. Remember, it's always the number attached to the variable. And so I get that x is equal to a -1/2. And so here are my two answers. So practice solving some with zero product property and let me know if you have questions.